Welcome to the Dealmaking with Laura DiFrancesco Podcast. I'm Laura DiFrancesco, your host. We're talking all about mergers and acquisitions, buying and selling small businesses, as well as corporate law. We are taking our experience closing over $10 billion of transactions since founding Dean Street Law 5 years ago, and my experience being an M&A and corporate attorney for over a decade and making it accessible to you as an entrepreneur. I hope that this helps you in navigating the complex world of mergers and acquisitions. And also, we're always happy to be a resource for you here at Dean Street Law. You can always apply to work with us through our complimentary consultations linked in our show notes. And a huge shout out and thank you to everyone who's subscribed and left us a 5-star review. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe and also leave us a 5-star review. It's one of the best ways to support us as a small business. And also be sure to share with your friends and colleagues on social media, through text, email, or however is easiest. It means the world to us that you're supporting our content and helps us make more to support you in your journey. Welcome back to the Dealmaking with Laura DiFrancesco podcast. I'm your host, Laura DiFrancesco, founder of Dean Street Law and author of Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition, a legal guide to buying a small business. In addition, I am fur mom to little Miss Tiger Kitty over here. Hello, Tiger Kitty. Hello, Tiger Kitty wants to join us to talk all about buying and selling a manufacturing business. So, with that said, if you haven't checked out my book, Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition, a legal guide to buying a small business, I encourage you to do so. Oh, wow, he's here as well. We have the first chapter available on our website. You can check it out through the link in the show notes or deanstreetlaw.com/links. And you can read it, leave an early review, find out where to purchase it, share it with friends. And if you leave a review, you can send your 5-star review to etareview@lauradifrancesco.co. And we'll send you a pre-LOI due diligence request list. So thank you guys all so much for your support for the book. And I'm so excited to get your feedback on it, share more about it. With that said, today's episode is all about the legal aspects of buying and selling a manufacturing business. And this tends to be one of the most frequent aspects of buying and selling a business. If I have to think of all the industries that people are buying and selling, professional services and those types of companies are prevalent, as well as healthcare and IT, SaaS companies, technology companies, but manufacturing is also one of the biggest. And it is one of the most prevalent that we work on at Dean Street Law as well. So let's talk a little bit about what you can expect to see in a sale or a purchase of a manufacturing company. So manufacturing companies tend to be considerably more asset heavy than regular traditional businesses. They typically have a facility. It can be very hard at times to find a new facility because of the expense of moving or installing equipment. Some of the deals that we've worked on, it would be a 3-year downtime to install equipment into a new facility. So these are really more complex businesses. And so they have a lot more nuances in terms of technology, intellectual property, labor, skilled labor, suppliers, manufacturers, and supply chain management, as well as customer relationships and equipment and assets overall. Those equipment and assets can be $1 million equipment, multi-million-dollar equipment, and can have 2 to 3 year build times or order times if they need to be replaced for some reason. So these are really unique types of transactions with a lot of different types of implications throughout the transaction process. In addition, because of the asset-heavy nature, tend to be very high value and cost associated with those assets, whether they be tooling machines or some type of manufacturing, whether it's manufacturing goods or manufacturing components or something like that. it can really have a significant capital expenditures aspect to the transactions. From the buy side and the sell side, really be transparent about those capital expenditures and what is expected going forward, as well as what's been historical. From the buy side, thinking those out, thinking of that major equipment, what is the useful life, what is it used for in the business, how much time do you have until it needs to be repaired or replaced, or what is the budget each year for capital expenditures and what is it going to? Is that something that you can predict, or is there a bit that you need to plan a little bit extra for? And then in addition to that, working capital tends to be another really big element that's negotiated in manufacturing deals. While working capital is in the vast majority of deals anyways, it tends to be a much bigger number with significantly more influence in your capital heavy businesses such as manufacturing. So due to that reliance on capital, it can have considerably more economic negotiations in it than a more traditional business. It may have inventory negotiations, valuation of inventory, tracking inventory prior to closing, and some other working capital determinations that need to be made before, during, and after closing as well. And then it also creates a little bit of a barrier of entry because of the bigger capital expenditure costs of getting into this manufacturing company. It does provide a little bit of protection, almost like a little moat around your business to protect you from competitors. But in the same vein, it also can be either an opportunity to use technology or innovations to better the company, but those technology and improvements may also be really significant investments because of the nature of the company. This is all going to be different from deal to deal, company to company, but all things that you can consider in one way or another. So those technology improvements could improve cost, could improve product, all of the aspects of the business, the intellectual property are all going to be proprietary for the most part and things that need to be transferred within the transaction. So some manufacturing companies have patents, trademarks, significant intellectual property. They could have trade secrets, all of which will be important to make sure on the sell side that you have all of these documented and that you are prepared to transfer that intellectual property, that you have been protecting that intellectual property because that is a really core aspect of the valuation of the business. And then from the buy side, it's important to make sure you understand that intellectual property, that you're getting the intellectual property you think you are, and that if there are any licensing or other aspects to it, that those are all covered with your attorney, since intellectual property tends to be one of the biggest components to a manufacturing transaction in addition to overall the assets themselves. Another key consideration is environmental impact. So certain manufacturing are pretty clean manufacturing and they don't have too many environmental impacts, but almost all lenders are going to require a phase 1, which will give an idea of the potential for contamination. And then a phase 2 may be required if there's further soil testing or other testing, groundwater testing that may be necessary to determine contamination. It's hopeful that there aren't going to be contaminations and that there has been a positive environmental blueprint of the company. But if there are issues with contaminations, those are very expensive to remediate for the most part, and they also delay a transaction considerably. If you're thinking that you can purchase a manufacturing company in less than 60 days, first off, you can't get most financing done in less than 60 days, but also when you add in the phase 1 and potential for phase 2, manufacturing companies tend to have a bit of a longer lead line for closing due to those phase 1 and phase 2 and environmental issues. Hopefully it's all clean bill of health, no issues, but it can be something that provides a wrinkle. In addition, because there is a facility for the most part, it is asset heavy. A key consideration is also the real estate. Will it be purchased post-closing or will it be leased? And how easy is it for the company to relocate if necessary? What is that relocation risk? That is going to be something that your lender will be looking at considerably in the underwriting process. A lot of lenders, especially SBA lenders, if there is any sort of relocation risk, will require that the lease be as long as the loan itself. So at least 10 years for the most part. That is dependent, but with manufacturing companies specifically, it tends to be something that you see more often than not, almost all the time. So the value of the real estate can be helpful in that you can finance it in a different way. You can use an SBA 504 loan, and same with the asset business. Because you have so many assets, it opens up more financing opportunities. And so you have asset-based lending in addition to your SBA loan and your potential 504 loan, SBA loan for the real estate. So it can come with some additional opportunities for the buyer from a financing perspective. And also from the seller may already have a certain amount of financing in place. They could have leases for certain equipment. They could have loans for certain equipment. And whenever you're thinking of current loans of the seller, most of the time the buyer's thinking, I want a cash-free, debt-free, tax liability-free purchase. But in fact, it may be beneficial, if possible, based on your other loans that you're getting for the purchase, it may be beneficial to actually keep some of those loans in place, because historically we've had better interest rates than we have in the current economic climate. Sometimes there are better interest rates that are grandfathered in from those prior loans, that it would actually be beneficial not to pay them off and to include them as a part of the purchase price economics and decisions. So before determining whether all of those should be paid off, it would be good to have conversations around interest rates, and potentially, of course, further down the line, once you're under LOI and have a better idea of the transaction, speaking with those lenders to see if those will be able to be transferred, or having your attorney, we would look at the documents and see what are the transfer rights, what are the assignment rights, is there change of control provision. Those are some key things to think about in terms of taking on financing that had been favorable to begin with. The other things when we're talking about contracts are supply chains, labor management, customer agreements. Contracts tend to be very, very important in manufacturing companies. Customer concentration plays into that. That is an important consideration as well when evaluating the business from a buy side. And from a sell side, thinking of your contracts, making sure that your contracts are well documented, well organized, prepared for diligence is important, because those contracts and understanding the assignability of those contracts is super, super important for the buyer and the seller to understand what third-party consents may be necessary for closing. And sellers, if you're thinking about selling your business in advance and you're preparing, be sure to, if you can, take a look at your assignment provisions in your contracts to make sure that any contract would be assignable with either written notice or just assignable by right. If it does require consent, rather, that it not be unreasonably withheld. And then if there are consent requirements, really understanding when those would be triggered. Is it a change of control, meaning the sale of the business, or is it the sale of the assets? Because the contract would need to be assigned. So those are all key considerations. We're going to talk about supply chain, customer relationships, and labor management separately, since those are also really important conversations. So the health and efficiency of the assets, the representations and warranties related to the assets, and inspections of those assets are going to be another key component of the transaction. So sellers making sure that the assets of the business are in good operable condition, that you feel comfortable standing behind them, that they've been well maintained. It's not buying a lemon or selling a lemon. Those are all key. And from a buy side, making sure, especially for that really high value equipment, that there are opportunities to get those inspected and review them, and that the representations and warranties are fair and appropriate for the transaction and the value of that equipment. When it comes to navigating corporate law, entrepreneurship, and managing small businesses, experience matters. Dean Street Law is a boutique corporate firm specializing in mergers and acquisitions and additional focus in real estate, commercial transactions, finance, and corporate governance. With over $10 billion in deals closed, Dean Street Law has extensive experience representing hundreds of clients in thousands of transactions, from small businesses to Fortune 500 companies. Whether you need startup guidance or advice on closing multi-million or multi-billion dollar deals, we're your trusted partner every step of the way. Visit deanstreetlaw.com in the show notes to schedule a complimentary consultation. Now, let's talk about supply chain and vendor relationships. With manufacturing companies, supply chain can be very influential, or it can be a more easy part of the transaction. But it's important to know what supply chain risks there are, how many people supply the different facets that are required for the inputs in the business to be required for the manufacturing, and if there's geopolitical risk, if there's imports, if there's taxes, what those impacts are. And if you're a seller preparing for sale of your business, trying to maximize the opportunities in supply chain and minimize the risks in supply chain. So finding other sourcing, understanding price and the cost of switching, or if there is an ability to switch, and just having a better understanding of supply chain risk going into the sale of your business will be helpful. And then from a buyer's perspective, thinking through that supply chain risk of, if this supplier shut down, would I still be able to maintain my business, meet my debt service, and overall continue to profit and have a business post-closing? All important. Now, with the specialized equipment that a lot of manufacturers have, that calls into question labor relations. Now, sometimes, more often in manufacturing than in other types of businesses, there may be collective bargaining agreements where the workforce has collectively negotiated with the employer for certain rights and the rules of the road with respect to the employee relationships. In addition, there may also be a specific set of really key employees, especially in the manufacturing sector, and or there may also be skilled employees of certain levels that may be more difficult to train, to hire than others. Especially sometimes in electrical contracting, for example, this can be the same with working those big pieces of equipment that may take a lot of training, and having a lot of times in these types of manufacturing companies, there's like your key foreman or something like that, or your key head person, and then you generally always have someone training under them, so that if there are some issues that come up for whatever reason, that there is successors enabled to rise into those positions when needed. So labor and human relations, whether it be contracts with key personnel, contracts with collective bargaining agreement, or overall just assessing the need to have alignment post-closing for retention of the labor pool, is super, super important. And so when you're thinking of incentivization, a lot of times if there is an asset purchase, you'll have offer letters. You don't want something super complex like an employment agreement that would be overly intimidating. You want something that's going to be approachable for employees. So offer letters, but offer letters that include incentives for retention or covenants that they will continue to be employed by the company for a certain period of time post-closing. And if they leave, they will provide a certain amount of notice. Those are really helpful and something that we work with our clients on. And then for key employees that are more of the executive roles, having proper employment agreements with those and seeing what is existing currently. But a lot of these relationships, for the most part, don't have employment agreements in place. And so as the buyer who will rely on people being a part of the business for the continued operation of the business, that is something that we want to make sure we get buttoned up and is secured post-closing. The next part is customer relationships and market concentrations. So if there are customer concentrations, then it becomes a question once the parties feel comfortable, perhaps after the purchase agreement is signed or after the purchase agreement is materially agreed upon, that there may be conversations with key customers, whether or not the relationship and contract require consent or notice, there still may be a benefit for both parties to have a positive transition of those customers. Now, with certain sellers, they may not be involved in the customer relations, and that may actually be to a detriment. So it's a conversation you want to have with your attorney, with the buyer, with the seller, with opposing counsel, to make sure that overall what you're doing is in the best interest of the company going forward, which tends to be the benefit of the seller, since they may have a seller note, as well as the buyer. So those are important considerations. Stewarding those relationships to the new owner successfully, it will benefit both the buyer and the seller. And then when you're thinking about a manufacturing business, is the tax considerations, because the assets are so heavily invested in a manufacturing business, it tends to be the tax consequences have considerably more impact than they would in an asset light business. And so the buyer will generally want the purchase to be characterized as an asset purchase, even if it is a stock purchase, so that they can get the step up in basis. But there is an inverse relationship between the benefits to a buyer in a certain tax classification and the benefits to the seller. So having conversations about the allocation of the purchase price and the tax election that the parties will make with respect to the transaction, whether it will be taxed as an asset purchase, regardless of whether it is, or whether it will be taxed as a stock purchase, that's a key consideration to the overall deal economics of the parties. So I hope that this conversation has been helpful on buying and selling a manufacturing business. We do a lot of it at Dean Street Law. So if you'd like to work with us, we'd love to hear from you. You can schedule a consultation call through the link in our show notes, deanstreetlaw.com/links. And you can also check out my book, Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition, a legal guide to buying a small business, if you haven't already. Thank you guys all so much for your support, and it means the world to us. We'd love to hear what you'd like to hear next on the podcast. Drop us a comment, share on social media, and tag us. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and check out the next podcast episode. Cheers and happy deal making. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Dealmaking with Laura DiFrancesco podcast. I hope you found today's discussion insightful and that it brought you one step closer to mastering the art of mergers and acquisitions. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to follow and subscribe to Dealmaking with Laura DiFrancesco on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And if you found value in our discussion, please leave a 5-star review. It would mean the world to us. And share this podcast with your network, friends, and colleagues. For more in-depth resources, be sure to visit our website, deanstreetlaw.com, where you can find articles, guides, and more information on our services. Don't forget to follow us on social media for the latest episodes, updates, tips, and exclusive content. You can find us on LinkedIn, Search Funder, at LMDFrancesco on X, and at Dean Street Law on Instagram. Join us on our next episode, where we'll explore more deal-making insights. Cheers and happy deal making.